Okay, so the meeting called to order. In attendance is Chris Wilson and Jeff Williams. On Zoom, we have Mike Guinan from the New Canaan, and we have Bill Finger from the Greenwich Affordable Housing Trust, and here to help us keep things moving is Bob Mantilio. So thank you, Jeff, for agreeing to speak to us. I have a few questions that I think they're aware of that I'd like to go through, just to get a sense of what the Greenwich Affordable Housing Trust is, how it was set up, and what its objectives are. So first, when and how was the Greenwich Affordable Housing Trust established?
So it was formally adopted by our RTM approximately 2 years ago, maybe almost 2.5 years ago. The idea for an affordable housing trust actually began with our 2009 POCD. I was a member of the task force dealing with affordable housing at that time, one of probably 20 members on the task force. It obviously didn't gain a whole lot of traction because it never happened at that time. Then when 2019 POCD, Greenwich had the 2019 POCD, again, affordable housing was right up there as one of the top priorities, actually was number 2. And when that happened, the chair of our Planning and Zoning Commission, Margarita Albin, kind of restarted the notion of an affordable housing trust. Margarita was one of the members on the task force back in 2009. So Margarita reached out to me and a few other individuals who were interested in the idea, one of whom was then an alternate member of Planning and Zoning Commission named Bob Barilak, his professional career was with one of the leading affordable housing management, development, and financing companies in the country, that's Greystone. And we started to put together the bones, if you will, of an affordable housing trust. We then presented it to the first selectman. The board of selectmen, they endorsed the idea, went to the RTM. The RTM wanted a task force formed to go through the language, talk about it some more, make sure they were aligned with what we as the original drafters had in mind. Our finance board, called the Board of Estimate and Taxation, also had some issues probably of control. So anyway, this task force was formed with members of the members of the RTM, and some myself and Bob Barilak and some other individuals who were not on the RTM. We hashed through it, and people came to it with different views as to what the goal was, what the game plan was, and it turned out to what I thought would be a cumbersome exercise actually ended up being a very positive one. We all coalesced upon this idea and the language for this Affordable Housing Trust Ordinance and a declaration of trust. Went back to the RTM, was vetted at the RTM level, the 253 members, whatever it is, in the Greenwich RTM, ultimately approved the document. Again, that was, I believe it was approved in March of 2022. So that's how it came about. Formed an Affordable Housing Trust and set forth the parameters to establish an Affordable Housing Trust Board. Trust Board is made up of 7 voting members. 5 members from the community with varying specified background or expertise, if you will. 1 member is the commissioner or director of planning and zoning, or his designee. He actually chose to serve on it as Patrick LaRoe. And the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, or her designee. And Margarita chose the designee was Bob Barilak. He has subsequently resigned because he's retired and changed his residence out of Greenwich, which made him ineligible to be on the commission, on the board. And another member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, Mary Jenkins, has taken his place. And that's, that was the structure of how we were formed initially.
Okay, so what are the key objectives of the AHT?
So we have two. One is, well, let me just go back. The impetus, or what really got people focused on the need for a trust, was Greenwich was experiencing several extremely large proposals for development of multifamily apartment projects under 830G and getting a lot of publicity. So, people were aware of the issue. The goals were twofold. One is to try to find a way to encourage developers to come forward with their 830G projects on a scale that was more in keeping with the particular neighborhood where the project was located. And I'll get into what we try to use as our leverage to, it's not really leverage, but our carrot and sticks to try to get them to agree to that. And the other was, consistent with the plan of conservation and development, is try to increase the number of affordable units, housing opportunities in the town of Greenwich. And I use affordable with a lowercase a, not an uppercase a. So that those were and are the priorities of the Affordable Housing Trust Board. Again, I'm sure we'll have some questions that will enable me to give you some more background on where we're successful and where we're not successful in those, but maybe I'll wait for the questions and see how it flows that way.
So is it correct to say that the focus is more on meeting the 10% 830G threshold than a moratorium or anything else?
Definitely not to try to reach the moratorium, only because we're so far away from being able to reach the moratorium. I mean, I think we have like 37 HUE points and we need 500, a little over 500. So that goal, notwithstanding what some people in my community think is attainable, because they don't understand the numbers, we just don't think that is reasonably feasible at all. We're at as a town, we're approximately 5.7% affordable under 830G. So we have a ways to go to 10%. I don't think this is me speaking, and I think a lot of people share my opinion. I'm not sure, we're going to ever reach 10%. Again, the focus is try to keep the scale of 830G projects down and satisfy the fact that Greenwich needs to find more affordable housing opportunities for people.
Great. So what are the sources of funding for the trust?
Well, the sources can be varied. The reality is that the only source we've been able to meaningfully tap into is that our finance board, again, Board of Estimate Taxation, allocated $1.1 million of American Rescue Plan funds that were going to Greenwich to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. But of that $1.1 million, $450,000 of that came with a string attached. That being, they would match that. They held that back, and that $450,000 would be matched dollar for dollar for every dollar of private funds we were able to raise. So we had $650,000 in our bank account, if you will, that's held by our town controller. We've been able to raise, I think, approximately $30,000 in private funding. So, we're working with $680,000. That's not a lot of money, and that has precluded us really from the mission. One of the goals is to try to increase the number of affordable housing units in the town proactively. I mean, we have provisions that if we got up to $2 million, then we have a requirement to go out for an RFP to find developers to build affordable housing. But we're not there. So we're working with that $680,000 that we have, which is obviously not a lot of money, but I think the way we're operating, we've been getting some pretty good mileage on how we allocate those funds.
Sorry, just so you're aware, John Goodwin, who's former chair of the P and Z,
Okay. Hi, John.
and is current chair of the Affordable Housing Committee in New Canaan, has joined us as well.
Welcome. Hi.
So I don't want to hog all the questions, but I do have a list. If anybody else has anything, jump in. So have you considered alternative or additional sources of funding?
Yes, we have. Obviously, we'd like to try to raise some private funding. Again, we haven't been very successful in that to date. We've had some conversations with our Board of Investment and Taxation about appropriating some tax dollars to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That has not been successful to date. We have just amongst ourselves, but we haven't proposed anything specific, talked about, whether it be adding a fee to building permits, which I think you do, and maybe I think possibly Westport and Fairfield may have the same thing. Actually, there was a group of RTM members sometime last year who tried to, there was a provision in front of the RTM, I think, increased the fee for fire department review of building applications. And some members of the RTM wanted to carve off some of that fee and allocate it to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That did not happen. I think there were some legal questions. That didn't get any traction. So the other thing is there's two large parcels of land in the northwest corner of Greenwich that are zoned for large office development. There's one existing large office complex, and another is just vacant land. And one of the owners of the office building has a lot of extra land. I think it's 160 acres or 116 acres. And they came in for rezoning, the planning and zoning, to allow for housing, residential, some form of multifamily or attached townhomes. And P&Z did make a change in the zoning to allow residential, but in order to take advantage of it, you have to make a payment to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I think it was $250,000 per unit, but it gets paid out over time, like if it's a condominium. You get it paid as you maybe get a building part of it, and the rest when you sell it. So somewhere on the horizon, there's an opportunity for us to get some significant dollars. The numbers that I've heard are somewhere in the $9 to $10 million range into the trust fund, but that's sometime out in the future.
Okay. How do you select your projects to support, and how does the trust support work in those projects?
So there's been a lot of, with 830G and projects in Greenwich, 830G, there's been a lot of publicity about the trust fund. So there's a lot of awareness in town amongst the development community, and certainly amongst the land use attorneys who work in Greenwich. So I would say that most developers who are proposing an 830G project or thinking of one, either directly or through their attorney, have made outreach to me or other members individually of the trust board to talk about what might be available. We put together policies and procedures that talk about how we operate, and in that we have a section on what we would expect from a developer when they want to make an application or come in front of us. So those developers who propose these projects have spoken with, like I said, various members of our trust board. We tell them what we need to look at, to review their application. They put the information together. Basically, it's a basic site plan, some financial information on their project. And the site plan is what it would look like under their 830G proposal, which is set aside, which is, the affordability is 15% to 30% affordable, half of which are 60% of state, the other half at 80%. and we say, as of right, what can you build? And then if we grant you some money or lend you some money and bestow assisted housing on you, now you can use, we'll allow you to use area median income. And we want to see how those numbers play out. And our threshold is 830G is 30%. With assisted housing, the governmental entity, us in this case, can determine the parameters. So we look for a 40-year deed restriction and a minimum of 20% affordable, but you must reduce the size of your project. So we look at what their return on investment would be with the set aside, and then we look at it, what it would be with the assisted, and we want to make sure that at least 80% of that financial benefit that they would get by going to area median income, we want that returned to us in the form of either reduction in the size of the project or an increase in the number of affordable units. They put that in front of us. We have finance people on our board. We have real estate, experience on the board. We look at the numbers. We have a lot of discussion back and forth. What's the mix of units? How can we get more units? How can we shrink the size? And we've been able to, in every instance, reach some level of agreement with the developer for, again, either a reduction in the size or an increase in affordable units if we give them the AMI opportunity. And, I'd say probably, I'm going to guess we've probably had 10 projects that have come to us, various sizes. I think we have 3 what we call conditional letters of commitment out there. A couple of developers just never came back, and those projects I haven't even seen an application submitted. Another developer, what he was proposing, we were not willing to go forward. It was a small project. We just felt that with the limited funds that we had, we weren't getting enough bang for our buck in terms of the number of units. So that's how we have been operating. Now, of course, we know with 830G, the developer basically can do whatever they want. So we have very little to no leverage as long as they can satisfy health and safety. And that's not our bailiwick, that's planning and zoning's bailiwick. But, so we look at the numbers. We're able to dig into the numbers, whereas planning and zoning tells us they are not able to dig into and look at the financial aspects of a deal and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense from a developer standpoint.
So you're essentially trying to equalize between the economics of an 830G project and a project with fewer affordable units and affordable units that rent at a percentage of area median income instead of state median income.
Right, they're both correct. They're both 830G projects because 830G has that assisted provision in there. But there are instances where we've said, okay, and these are for small projects. Now, if somebody proposes a 4-story residential project in in part of town that has maybe only 2 stories and maybe a retail on the first floor, maybe 2 stories above, and the total unit count is going to be 15 as a set aside, and we get them to come down and make it 3 stories and 10 units, total 10 units, and they said, we can't do 3 units, we can only do 2 units, so it's 20%. So we'll agree in those few instances to take 20% as opposed to 30%. But again, we're talking about, 2 versus 3 or 4 versus 5 units, something like that. Some of the larger projects that we've given conditional letters of commitment to, one in particular, proposed as, it was proposed as 6 stories and 30% state median income. We tried to get the developer to reduce the size using area median income. He said, no, he wants to do 6 stories. So what we did on that one, we reached, an understanding and agreement where by making a small loan to that developer, giving him AMI, he's giving the town 40% of his units are going to be affordable at AMI, with the same unit count as what it would have been under set aside. But again, my opinion, It's in the downtown area of Greenwich. It's next door to another 6-story building, residential building across around the corner from another 6-story. So my opinion, it wasn't out of character. My opinion and those of my 6 colleagues on the trust board wasn't out of character.
And this gets to an obvious question. What is your relationship or the relationship between the Affordable Housing Trust and the P&D or the Affordable Housing Trust and the town planner in terms of getting them to sign off on the projects that you've issued commitment letters?
Okay. As I mentioned, the town planner sits on our board. He's a voting member of our board. So we do get some input from him on how it might be viewed at planning and zoning. He's in I think a difficult spot because he's wearing 2 hats in a sense. Our relationship with the Planning and Zoning Commission is an evolving relationship. We as I mentioned, we can look at the economics and we can help figure out, does this make sense? Does it not make sense for the developer to reduce the size, things of that sort. Planning and Zoning Commission looks at it differently. So what we've done in the last month or 2, we've had 2 meetings with Planning and Zoning, just our board and the Planning and Zoning Commissioners. It's a publicized meeting, but no public input. And we talk about, what we look at, what they look at, trying to explain to them how we approach deals. And before that, and even since we've had those meetings, when there's an application that the Affordable Housing Trust has already looked at, I or another member of our trust board will be invited by the Planning and Zoning Commission to explain, what we looked at and why we're making this recommendation. What we've realized is what was happening was that the developers were coming to us. We look at a project, we looked at the numbers of units. We didn't necessarily look at whether they were 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, what the mix was. Planning and Zoning looks at it differently. They're more concerned, I think, about, or more height. Their concern is a little more heightened on some of the optics, about getting a mix of certain types of units. But if we gave a conditional commitment, the developer then goes with, say like, 4-story building with 7 1-bedroom units, and he goes to Planning and Zoning and said, no, we want a mix of 2 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom units. He has a commitment from us for only 1 bedroom. That's only 1 bedroom. His finances are based upon that. So what we've decided with Planning and Zoning, as we've met with them, that the best way to approach this would be to encourage a developer, before they come to the trust board for our quote unquote negotiation, is to first go to Planning and Zoning for a pre-application hearing. I don't know whether you do a pre-apps in New Canaan.
John is nodding, so yes.
Okay, so in Greenwich they do that, and that's an opportunity for both the developer and our trust board to understand what the thinking is among the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So, for example, one project that came to us before they went for the pre-app, as I mentioned, we got them to reduce the size of the building, and it was all 1-bedroom units. The finances worked that way. Planning and Zoning said, we want some 2-bedroom units. The developer could, but he already had his commitment for a loan from us. He then, trying to satisfy Planning and Zoning, he now was in a dilemma where he didn't have a commitment from us for something that now would require him to have 3.5 stories as opposed to, 3.5 stories as opposed to 4 stories. We had agreed to 3 stories. Planning and Zoning, what they wanted ultimately would require him to go 3.5 stories. So he was in a dilemma. He got some kind of conditional approval from Planning and Zoning with the understanding he would come back to us. We then rescinded the original commitment, gave him a new one that was consistent in general terms with Planning and Zoning. So that was satisfied. Another developer came to us. We had worked something out where he was shrinking the size of one of the buildings and providing 30% affordable AMI. But it was a really unique project. He had one building that was high-end condominiums, another building that was rentals that were going to we got him to agree to make it all affordable, and got, 40% of the units were affordable. Planning and Zoning Commission didn't like one building being all affordable rentals, and the other building being all high-end condominiums. They wanted a mix. So we found that out during pre-application. He came back to us. We negotiated some more. We gave him some distribution. And while we didn't issue a conditional letter of commitment, they just asked for a letter indicating what our thinking was, that he can go back to, he and his lawyer can go back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and present to them that this is, what the trust board wants. And basically, we said, we'll either give them a conditional commitment for either the two separate types of buildings with affordables in one and not affordable in the other, or some kind of mix. So that was where we started to realize that pre-application hearings were the way to go before we get too entrenched in our project, in the project.
I think I'm aware from talking to Sally of the sort of amounts and type of financing you provide and where it sits in the cap stack, but could you cover that?
Yeah, it's, we're offering very small loans. Like I said, we only have $680,000 to work with, trying to spread it around. I think we have 6-7 commitments out there now. The smaller projects, we offer a $50,000 to make a $50,000 loan to the developer. That would be in a second position in the capital stack, in the lending capital stack. Obviously subordinate to its first construction loan or permanent loan. Again, land use restrictions, 40 years. The interest rate would be, I forgot whether it's like 100 basis points or something like that above whatever his first mortgage loan interest rate would be. And it'd be a 20-year term, prepayable at any time with no prepayment penalty. For some of the, I'll call the larger projects, that loan is a $100,000 loan with essentially the same terms. One of the other, I neglected to mention, one of the problems that I foresee and my colleagues on the trust board foresee with the way Greenwich has so far chosen to finance the trust fund with the American Rescue Plan dollars, those dollars under the federal grant have to be expended by a certain date. And if you don't spend it, you got to give the money back. So we have a requirement in these conditional commitments that we give developers that they have to start we'll fund the loan when they close on the land or on their construction loan. But if they don't do it by December 31, 2025, our commitment goes away. And that's a problem because, developer may come in now to us, and planning and zoning doesn't mean he's going to get or she's going to get their approval right away. It may take a couple of months. And then depending what the finance world is out there for that particular developer, hopefully they can get started before the end of 2025. But if they don't, that's something we're trying to figure out. We will try to convince our Board of Investment Taxation to somehow maybe swap tax funds with some of the ARPA dollars and, switch dollar for dollar. Maybe we'll be successful, maybe we won't, but that's one of the dilemmas that we have.
An interesting problem. What improvements, if any, would you make to the current setup of the Affordable Housing Trust in any aspect, given the benefit of some experience?
Well, clearly, trying to find a reliable source of revenue, that would be very helpful for us. We're going to start working a little bit more on that now that the town's budget has been approved. Maybe the finance committee board has some more time to devote to focusing on this. Just trying to figure out the best way to interact with Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, as I said, it's an evolving process with us. We've had these 2 meetings, joint meetings, where I think it's been very productive for both the commission and our board to get a better understanding. I mean, there are some members of the trust board that vehemently disagree with some of the, the concepts that Planning and Zoning Commission has, and what they're looking for, and we have to get through it. We understand it, try to work through it, but I think finding a way to have both the board and the commission work together or collaboratively, at least in understanding how the other operates, and having open lines of communication, whether it's through public meetings or or what other permissible methods there are to communicate with one another. I think that's the biggest thing, and funding. Those are the two biggest things from our standpoint.
Do you think the Affordable Housing Trust would be useful if Greenwich was able to achieve a moratorium under 830G, notwithstanding your comments earlier about the unlikelihood of achieving one?
I would say yes. Whether the appetite of the members of our town who control the purse strings would be willing to allocate funds to allow us to do that is another story. But I think yes. I think yes.
Any other advice for New Canaan in considering setting up an affordable housing trust?
I don't, other than, again, trying to find a reliable source of funding, whether it's through tax appropriation or percentage of your building permit fees. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, one of the other things that we do also is we have obligations on an annual basis to report to the town, for the selectmen, the RTM, what we've done, how we're spending or allocating our funds. So there's an attempt to, not an attempt, there's a requirement, an obligation, and certainly, we're very much receptive to this, is keeping everybody in town aware of what we're doing. All of our meetings are, publicly noticed, and they're all Zoom meetings and they're recorded. So everything, we have members of the public who listen in. We don't have public comment unless it's somebody who's an applicant on the project.
Anything else?
It's been a good quick Q&A. I really.
Yeah, it's an interesting initiative, and obviously it has worked in the sense that it's allowed them to manage some of the 830G projects that are in front of them. And you've had success in getting agreement.
Yeah, we have. I mean, I'm a developer myself. I do multifamily. I don't do affordable development, so it doesn't affect it. I don't do anything Greenwich, so it doesn't. None of this is affecting me. But it's the developers. To be able to get area median income is a big deal for them, and I think generally from everybody, with the exception of one developer or one property owner, everybody has recognized that to be able to provide more affordable units and or reduce the size of the project, maybe cuts them a little bit more slack with planning and zoning. I mean, they're still going to get criticism from the community for most anything they do in a lot of instances, but it makes for a project that's more in scale for the neighborhood, and most of the developers have some skin in the game in Greenwich, whether they're a resident of Greenwich, whether they have a business in Greenwich or something like that. So it's been pretty good. There's only one project that we actually didn't come to us, that we reached out to and suggested that they come to us, and it was they weren't interested. I mean, I think under the new legislation this past session, maybe they're going to end up benefiting. It's a nursing home, so they may have their own benefits that come out of that. I don't know whether they anticipated anything, but they didn't want to have anything to do with us. But that's their prerogative. Yeah,
just to one interesting aspect, which I think I saw on your website, was one of the subtle benefits of area median income over state median income is that you move it to, I think your area median income is the same as ours, about 131 thousand of annual income, which means it becomes more workforce housing.
Yes,
than what we find with the state median income, which doesn't necessarily work for our police officers or teachers.
yeah, yeah. So the state median income, a lot of our workforce can't qualify for it.
Yeah.
We have I don't know if you have a housing authority. We have a housing authority called Greenwich Communities, and they provide some truly affordable low-income opportunities. So it's not like the town is precluding very low-income residents from being able to find places. It's just the way we've been operating.
Anything else before we let Bill go?
So let me just ask you. So Bill,
Yeah.
Are you at all interested in what viewpoints are generated by these affordable housing developments, or do you just ignore that altogether?
The viewpoints from the community.
HUE points.
Oh, you know, we keep a tally, but again, well, first of all, assisted right now, unless it was, I think there was some legislation that would have, I don't know whether it passed, that would have allowed AMI units to be considered for HUE points. I don't know whether that passed or not, but up until this legislative session, if it did pass, you know, when you give assisted housing doesn't count HUE points. So the answer would be no, we're not. I mean, again, we're so far away from it. It's just,
I believe that these units qualify for the 10% affordable.
yes, correct,
Not for the 830.
The moratorium.
correct.
It was just the 830G project as was originally proposed. They would get some HUE points.
Right. So what I was asking about was, where did they get the authority to move from a SMI to a AMI?
It is in the 830G legislation where if you, we'd have to ask the lawyer to define exactly, but if there's.
I have it in front of me. I'll read it. This under 830G, paragraph 3. The definition of assisted housing means housing which is receiving or will receive financial assistance under any governmental program for construction or substantial rehabilitation of low, moderate income housing and any housing occupied by persons receiving rental assistance. And then later on, somewhere else in the housing statute, it allows the governmental entity, and I don't have that in front of me, to be able to set the parameters on affordability.
And the housing trust is the government.
Yes, yes. There's an ordinance that establishes us. You know, all of our funding is held by the town. We are an entity of the town.
But
everybody has to be appointed by the town.
But you don't get credit.
You get percentage of affordable credit, but you don't get moratorium credit.
Yeah, and that's why they can do it. That's why they do it.
Yeah.
So they are not.
Listen to the.
They're not really seeking moratoriums. They're not. The purpose of this, as he laid out, was to keep the scale of the 830G projects in line with the scale of the adjacent communities.
Right. Yeah. Unlike the town of New Canaan, I mean, like I said, I'm just repeating myself. We're not anywhere close to having the HUE points that would get us to a moratorium.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. That's helpful.
And this is broadly in line with something, I can't remember who brought it up in a previous affordable housing committee meeting. One of our speakers mentioned $25,000 loan grants for rehab that I think New Haven does. That this is under the same piece of the 830G code. That's very, very helpful, Bill. Really appreciate you dialing in.
No problem. You know,
Thank you, Bill.
if you have other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay.
Okay.
And reach out if we can be of help to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Bye.
We can start off by saying they don't even think about moratoriums.
Well, it's interesting. We've heard that from many people in many towns. Some towns have just thrown in the towel, but that's not our strategy.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, the other thing, sorry, that Sally Bednar, who I spoke to, who was the one who introduced me to Bill, mentioned is that they do have a lot of areas of Greenwich, particularly near Portchester, where you have essentially naturally occurring affordable housing.
Yeah.
And a number of the projects that they're encouraging are actually in those areas. So for a developer, the market rent he'd get is not dramatically different than the percentage of AMI rent. So he really is encouraged to work with them and get the
And
project
so
done on
when,
that
as he
basis.
was talking, I was thinking, well, how do you get so much leverage with only a $50,000 loan?
That's, yeah.
And
Well, it's the jump in AMI
it's jumping
and the
in.
reduction in the percent of units
Yeah.
that are affordable. So instead of 30%, they're asking.
They're allowing 20%, okay?
Typically 20%, and it varies, and they're able to require different amounts.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, that's their jurisdiction.
And like you pointed out, Chris, they're trying to achieve a different objective than we would be trying to achieve.
Yes,
They're trying to scale things, they're trying, it's. And so,
it's still an interesting idea. The other part, you know, we didn't really talk about is they've only been able to raise 30,000 of private funds. I'm not, there might be more appetite in this town
did you hear
for
what?
private
Yeah,
funds
Yeah.
for this purpose. You know, I think you'd wanna team it with some recurring source of revenue. And obviously, the town of Greenwich is trying to create a recurring source through what they did on the rezoning of the office site, but that's a more long-term recurring source, whereas ours is a current.
Yeah.
Recurring source. So we'll wrap that up for the moment. I thought it was worth having, and now Maria's on the line, having a brief discussion of the objectives of this subcommittee in light of the recent events around legislation and the potential change that has in terms of our objectives for the next moratorium. The one after it, the one we're about to get, we hope, knock on wood. So I don't know if there was any discussion in the other subcommittee about that, and whether that be worth you providing us a download on, John. Or Jeff, you were both there.
Yeah, well, we reapplied yet again. And we expect approval.
It is astounding that the Department of Housing, in regular dialogue with the town, would not have pointed out the change in the county.
Well, you're spot on, and on top of that, they did. As I'm sure everybody here knows, they did come back to us with some technical defects.
Some other technical.
Yeah, which were remedied in resubmissions. So, yeah.
So Chris, the other meeting, the net is, it doesn't change our strategy. We just hope that we don't get a 30G application in the next 3 months. So that's key point number one. Key point number two is, we're going to, that committee is going down the road of looking at a more traditional significant development, which may be 100% affordable or maybe mixed income. And then exploring also the concept of small ball, which, as Maria pointed out, one of the things we talked about is, you know, the concept's a very, very interesting concept. You know, will it work economically? Maria pointed out that, or you said that you don't even get the 4% tax credits, right?
Yes, correct. Yep. Yes, correct. It would be the 4% tax credits because we likely wouldn't be able to get the 9%. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So, you know, that's obviously a negative. The positives are you don't increase density, it gives you the opportunity to address areas around, you know, called the town village footprint that, you know, can be upgraded. You know, there were, you know, what we call naturally affordable housing. as Mike Sweeney pointed out, a negative of that is, how to track that as a housing authority, and that's typically, the job of the housing authority. And I think for the, I was thinking about it, and I think, so one of the questions for the finance committee would be, is that something that can be economically feasible? As I've been thinking about, and I just talked to Krista about it, is it's something that can also be encouraged by a change in planning and zoning regulations, where we could go, let's say we decided this was a good strategy. A good vehicle, this planning and zoning regs would be to, enable people to come in, buy up those properties on a private basis. But then the question is, how do we make it economically feasible? Or does the town still have to contribute?
Yeah.
And you're not getting the 4% tax credits. One of the other things that I've been asking, I need to do more homework about it is, particularly as you get smaller, there's not in New Canaan, but elsewhere, there's a big participation of nonprofit vehicles that provide affordable housing. So that was the outcome on that, and then and then we divvied up 7 sites. Each of the members are going to look at 7 sites
To develop backstory.
criteria as the next level. And then one of the things that I'm then thinking about is at what point, do we, you and I have talked about this, is at what point do we bring in some third party help?
Yeah.
What's the nature of that help? We're citizen soldiers, we can't be doing all this work.
Yeah, I think at the very minimum, an architect to sort of give us some block diagrams of what might work on different sites and how many units plus or minus it would be.
Yeah.
A sort of massing study rather than any sort of architectural rendering. The other part of small ball, which is probably not this subcommittee, but something generally to consider. I think it was Art Cassivan who, discouraged small units started around from an operational perspective.
Right.
And we do have to take into account cost of maintaining and monitoring units.
And that was Mike Sweeney's point as well.
Yeah.
I mean, look, the reality is maybe it's not a viable strategy,
But we should pull the thread.
yeah,
We
exactly.
should pull the thread.
Maria, anything else in terms of this topic, objectives, subcommittee objectives?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I guess the only other thing is maybe to talk with, I'm still waiting, Francis Pickering keeps saying that report's gonna be coming out soon. But I know that there are some analysis that was done to talk about different ways, to get some credits and points. So, once that becomes available, we should definitely analyze that to see if there is some cost-effective ways of doing certain things like, potentially for elderly or some other sort of rehab projects where someone already owns a home. That gives you only a 10-year loan. That's a forgivable loan. But for a low investment cost, it becomes deed restricted. And if we kept maybe a small inventory, again, that could be a small ball solution for us, given that we only need a small ball solution right now for the next moratorium. So as we're going to develop something longer, something a larger, that's going to take longer term to put together, that might be a good solution for us. That's pretty cost effective in the short term.
It is, but the caveat is that those units would have to generate viewpoints. And that means dealing with the management of income restricted units, which is not something that
The homeowner might want to.
the homeowner wants to take on necessarily, but it's something to consider. We'll have to see how it works. Future speakers, you mentioned not-for-profits that do affordable housing. Bob and I have been talking about some potential speakers we can bring in, and I'll focus on that for our next subcommittee meeting. Any other type of speakers you'd like to hear from?
Not right now.
Public comments?
Well, technically, I'm not a member of the
Yes,
subcommittee. so
I think you've already commented.
You covered the public comments.
You're officially scolded for commenting in the wrong place. Unless there's anything else, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Just got back from Ireland, Chris.